Hell on Wheels was a gritty, character-driven Western TV show that never really got the credit that it deserved. So let's take a look behind the scenes of the show with 20 things you didn't know about Hell on Wheels, such as how Anson Mount got into character, how Season 3 saved the show from an early cancellation, and the proposed idea for an official revival of the series. So the show was initially devised by brothers Joe and Tony Gayton, both American screenwriters who'd previously worked together on the Dwayne Johnson action movie Faster. And not long after, the pair were inspired to team up again upon watching an American Experience documentary, all about the construction of the First Transcontinental Railroad, which they thought would make for a great setting for a new Western TV show. A show that eventually became Hell on Wheels, which was actually the real name of the lawless mobile settlement that accompanied the construction of the American Railroad in the 1860s. Now, although Hell on Wheels was initially inspired by real historical events, the Gayton brothers made a conscious decision to keep most of the show fictional, wanting to tell a story that showed what America could be like at its absolute best and absolute worst. But with that being said, there were elements of the show that were still very much rooted in history. For instance, Thomas Durant was a real-life financier and the vice president of the Union Pacific Railroad, who had a reputation for being a shrewd but ethically questionable businessman, much like he is in the show. The character of Eva is also believed to be based on a woman called Olive Oatman, who as a teenager was enslaved by Native Americans, becoming the first white woman on record to have a native tattoo. The show also managed to work in a fair few historical cameos, including famous real-life figures such as Collis Huntington, Brigham Young, and Ulysses Grant. So although the Gayton brothers were confident that Hell on Wheels could be a hit if they got the show picked up, the chances of doing so initially seemed pretty slim, given that at the time there were very few westerns on TV outside of Deadwood. However, in 2006, AMC released a western miniseries called Broken Trail, which proved to be a big hit with fans and critics alike. And right around the time that the pilot for Hell on Wheels was being shopped around, AMC had just recently pulled the plug on their new thriller Rubicon, meaning that they were actually in the market for a new series to replace it. So upon watching the pilot for Hell on Wheels, they were quick to greenlight a 10-episode series order, with its president of original programming, Joel Stillerman, saying, "AMC's commitment to the Western is long-standing, and the genre is an important part of our brand and history as a channel. This show brings some incredibly original twists and turns, and a contemporary sensibility that we think will bring a very broad audience to our newest drama series." And just like that, Hell on Wheels managed to slip onto a stacked roster for AMC, alongside heavy hitters such as Breaking Bad, The Walking Dead, Mad Men, and The Killing, which as I'll cover later proved to be both a blessing and a curse. So another issue that the Gayton brothers had with Hell on Wheels early on was finding an actor to play Cullen Bohannon, knowing that whoever they picked would essentially be the face of the show moving forward. This made the casting process all the more stressful, with Tony Gayton saying, "We were getting a little desperate. We saw 50 or 60 people and we didn't think we were going to find him. And then one night, I got his audition DVD from New York, looked at it and called Joe immediately and said, 'I just found our guy.' And the guy he was referring to was Anson Mount, a relatively unknown actor who was promptly offered the part, thanks to his authentic Southern background and rugged look that they felt was far removed from the typical Hollywood pretty boy. But the irony was that up to this point, Anson Mount had all but made a career out of playing handsome love interests, with his most famous role being in the infamous Britney Spears film Crossroads. So the character of Cullen Bohannon was a complete departure from the sort of roles that Anson Mount was used to, meaning that he didn't really have any prior experience to draw from. And although the actor has never cited any direct inspirations for his performance, he did reveal that around the time of his audition, he began playing the Western video game Red Dead Redemption, with many fans since pointing out how similar his character is to the protagonist of the game, John Marston. He also revealed that he's a big fan of Lee Marvin, for the way in which he could seamlessly switch between playing a hero and a villain, a skill that Mount himself had to quickly master in order to play a convincing anti-hero. Now, as important as Anson Mount was to the show, Hell on Wheels would be nothing without its larger cast, who played a whole host of memorable, larger-than-life characters that really added to the series. For instance, Irish actor Colm Meaney proved to be a perfect pick for Thomas Durant, bringing a mix of gravitas, charisma, and authority to the role, similar to his commanding performances in The Commitments and Layer Cake. Another really important casting in the show was for the character of Elam Ferguson, a former slave seeking a new life who ended up being played by the award-winning American rapper Common, which might have initially seemed like a pretty odd choice. However, he apparently blew everyone away with his audition, fully committing to his role before striking up a genuine on-screen chemistry and off-screen friendship with Anson Mount. The show also introduced America to multiple up-and-coming actors from other countries, such as Dominique McElligott, Robin McLeavy, Phil Burke, and Ben Elser. Another hugely important casting in Hell on Wheels was that of its main antagonist, the Swede, a sadistic Norwegian immigrant working as the head of security for the Union Pacific. And the actor who ended up bagging the part was Christopher Heyerdahl, who, being of Norwegian descent, was really keen to take on a complex Scandinavian role, saying, "This kind of character is very rare. The fact that it fits so well with my background and my understanding of a Norwegian man, it all just fell into place. As an actor, it seemed to be tailor-made for me." And he wasn't wrong, as he totally stole the show with his performance as the Swede, fully embodying the character while often improvising his lines, which made for a terrifying villain that proved to be the perfect foil for Cullen Bohannon. Even now, the Swede remains one of the most talked about elements of Hell on Wheels, with the actor unsurprisingly being offered lots of villainous roles ever since. Now, although Hell on Wheels didn't exactly have the most recognisable cast, it did feature its fair share of well-known Hollywood actors, such as Ted Levine, Wes Studi, and Tom Noonan, who strangely enough all appeared together in the classic 1995 crime drama Heat. The show also ended up featuring an on-screen Star Trek crossover, with Colm Meaney famously playing Miles O'Brien on both Star Trek The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, while Anson Mount later went on to play Captain Christopher Pike in Star Trek Discovery and Strange New Worlds. Another problem that the creators of Hell on Wheels had to overcome was actually finding somewhere to film the show, given how integral the setting was to the story. So initially, AMC considered filming in Texas and New Mexico, before eventually setting on Calgary, Alberta in Canada, where they had previously shot Broken Trail. They then decided to rent 15,000 acres of untouched prairie on an Indian reservation, which was big enough that it allowed for the production to shoot in all directions, with the lush, untamed wilderness really adding to the visual depth and authenticity of the show. The only problem was that Calgary was prone to very unpredictable weather, such as extreme heat waves and unexpected snowstorms, which often disrupted production. In fact, at one point, filming on Season 3 had to be suspended due to flooding, given that the only road to set was left completely underwater. So because Hell on Wheels was inspired by real-life events, the production team went to great lengths to ensure that the show appeared as historically accurate as possible. As such, they did lots of research into the real Hell on Wheels camp, using old photos to organically guide their creative decisions in regards to how the camp looked and operated on screen. They also decided to build a period-accurate locomotive for the show, which secretly ran on modern engines but was disguised underneath a detailed replica of an 1860s-era steam train. Equally, any scenes involving explosions or large-scale destruction were often done with practical effects rather than CGI, so as to add to the gritty realism. They also spent a lot of time and money damaging and dirtying all of the period-accurate outfits in an effort to try and show that the characters were often wearing the same clothes for weeks and months without cleaning them. Another aspect of the show that was given a lot of consideration was how it would depict violence, given that the story was naturally going to feature a great deal of it. And although the Gayton brothers had always envisioned Hell on Wheels as a violent show, they never wanted it to be gratuitous. So instead, they decided to focus more on the chaotic element of the violence rather than the gore, pushing for fight scenes to be as messy and unchoreographed as possible, just like they would have been in real life. Another element of Hell on Wheels that the creators really wanted to get right was its gunfights, specifically the real-world limitations of guns from that period, with Joe Gayton saying, "People don't hit you from 10 feet away. These guns weigh 4 pounds. If you're shooting at somebody, you might empty your whole cylinder and not hit the guy, and then have to reload. So they put a lot of thought into deciding what firearms would appear in the show. And although the top priority was making sure that the guns were period accurate, the production was keen to highlight the more unusual, distinct guns that were used during that time, hence the inclusion of a pepper box and a blunderbuss. This thinking was also part of the reason Cullen was introduced with a Confederate-made Griswold & Gunnison revolver, because it was a very distinctive firearm that was heavy and packed a punch. So as is the case with most TV shows, Hell on Wheels relied upon lots of different directors to helm various episodes of the show, and Hell on Wheels actually managed to draw in some real top talent, who since working on the show have all gone on to have really impressive careers as directors. Also, for the very first and final episodes of the show, Hell on Wheels actually managed to secure the services of the late David Von Anken, who previously directed the 2006 Western movie Seraphim Falls. So when Hell on Wheels finally premiered on November 6, 2011, the pilot episode was watched by a whopping 4.4 million viewers, easily besting its network slot rivals such as CSI Miami and Pan Am. This made it AMC's second highest series premiere in history, just behind The Walking Dead, which was airing its second season around the same time, meaning a lot of that audience was naturally crossing over. And although the ratings for Hell on Wheels gradually dropped across its first season, it still managed to average 3 million viewers per episode. So unsurprisingly, Hell on Wheels was renewed for a second season, which still managed to maintain respectable ratings, with an average of 2.4 million viewers per episode. So following 2 successful seasons, it seemed like the future of Hell on Wheels was looking bright. But after season 2, it was announced that the Gayton brothers would no longer be involved in the day-to-day production of the show, despite being the creative driving force behind it. But even so, AMC was still keen on renewing Hell on Wheels for a third season, apparently viewing John Shaban as the perfect candidate to take over, given that he'd already served as showrunner for season 2. However, not long after, he also announced that he would be leaving the show, giving AMC no choice but to delay the season 3 renewal, deciding that they would only continue the series if they could find a suitable replacement. And luckily they did, as writer and producer John Worth stepped forward to get the show back on track, having previously worked on underrated TV shows such as The Sarah Connor Chronicles and The Adventures of Briscoe County Jr. So with John Worth officially on board, AMC greenlit season 3 and effectively handed him creative control of the show moving forward. Now this easily could have ended in disaster, given that it was a totally new showrunner stepping into a series full of pre-established storylines and characters that he had no hand in creating. However, Worth took all of this in his stride, making clear from the outset that he not only wanted to build on the legacy of the first 2 seasons, but also take Hell on Wheels to a whole new level. And his first step in doing so was reconstructing Cullen Bohannon, saying, "He's going to drink less and talk more this season. We've given him a less opaque life to get involved with. We've opened him up as a character." Worth also made an effort to streamline the narrative, putting the emphasis of the plot back on the construction of the railroad, while introducing lots of new original characters. And as a result of these changes, Hell on Wheels went from strength to strength, going on to deliver some of the show's most memorable moments and highest rated episodes. Now, although John Worth clearly did a good job with Hell on Wheels considering the circumstances of his appointment, there were some common criticisms of the seasons that he managed, such as pacing issues, repetitive storylines, and inconsistent characters. But arguably one of the bigger mistakes that he almost made was considering killing off Cullen Bohannon before the end of the series, having actually developed an idea of how he would go about doing so. However, after lots of back and forth with his fellow writers, eventually the decision was made to let Cullen live, believing that killing him off just for the sake of it would make his story up to that point feel somewhat pointless. So although AMC clearly had enough faith in Hell on Wheels to renew it for a third season, there were some fans that felt as if the network could have done more to support the show. For instance, after season 2, AMC decided to move Hell on Wheels to a Saturday night time slot, which was traditionally seen as a low visibility period for TV, often reserved for content that networks don't really prioritize. But despite this, the premiere of Hell on Wheels Season 3 actually saw a bump in ratings and performed relatively well moving forward, maintaining a loyal audience for 3 more seasons. And this was particularly impressive given that AMC often came under criticism for how little it seemed to promote the show, especially in comparison to the likes of The Walking Dead. However, when Anson Mount was asked about this, he shone some light on the reasons why, saying, "I'm sure every fan of every show feels that show doesn't get enough promotion. Ours is a tough one as our audience is different than all the other AMC series, which have mostly appealed to a coastal blue state audience. I feel we skew more middle American red state. That's a very different thing to sell, but we're all working on it." Equally, when John Wirth was asked about how the show was handled, in hindsight he said,
AMC, as supportive as they were, and they were, we always felt like we were kind of the redheaded stepchild over there. They had Breaking Bad, a brilliant show. They had Mad Men, a brilliant show. They had Walking Dead, which is what it is. And they had us. Whenever you would see anything about AMC or anybody at AMC talking about their slate, they would talk about those 4 shows and they would never mention Hell on Wheels.
So although Hell on Wheels posted pretty respectable ratings throughout its 3rd and 4th season, by its 5th it was clear that the show had run out of steam, with a slow but steady decline in its viewership. As such, AMC decided to call time on the series, allowing it to wrap up its story with a 2-part season, before shifting its focus towards new shows like Preacher, Turn, and Into the Badlands. The network even tried introducing new Western shows like The Sun and That Dirty Black Bag, but neither one really resonated with audiences in the same way as Hell on Wheels. Although, with that being said, they have recently found success with their new neo-Western crime drama Dark Winds, which ironically happens to be headed up by John Wirth. Now, although Hell on Wheels aired its final episode all the way back in 2016, thanks to the advent of streaming, the show is still managing to find new fans even now, with Wirth saying, "People discover it all the time, and I cannot tell you how many people I meet who, when they find out I worked on the show, talk to me about what that show meant to them." So given its continued popularity and the current resurgence of the Western genre on TV, some fans have wondered if maybe Hell on Wheels could make a return to our screens in the near future, in a similar way to Deadwood. And as it turns out, John Wirth has actually considered the idea, having already pitched a new Hell on Wheels story to Anson Mount. And although he didn't reveal much about the project, the plot would apparently be based on the first robbery of a train on the Transcontinental Railroad, prompting Cullen Bohannon to lead a manhunt for the robbers across California. But apparently the actor wasn't really keen on the idea, feeling that there had to be more of a compelling reason for his character to return after all these years than just heading up a posse. So for now, it would seem that there are no official plans to bring back Hell on Wheels, despite it clearly being discussed as a possibility. But let me know below, would you have liked to have seen more Hell on Wheels? And if so, where would you have wanted the story to go next? Also, if you enjoyed the video, it'd be great if you could leave it a like, and you might also want to check out this video right here.